lysine is going to be glucogenic or glucogenic and ketogenic. And this is going to be one of the only ones that's going to be purely ketogenic. Okay. So let's kick it off with the enzyme lysine alpha-ketoglutarate reductase. Now what I want to say is this lysine alpha-ketoglutarate reductase is part of a larger mitochondrial enzyme complex. And specifically, it's a complex between this enzyme and another one called saccharine dehydrogenase. And specifically, the way the enzyme is set up is where lysine alpha-ketoglutarate reductase is near the N-terminus, and the C-terminus contains saccharine dehydrogenase. And so it's a bifunctional enzyme complex. Okay? But right now, we're only going to concern ourselves with lysine alpha-ketoglutarate reductase. Now, this is a strange catabolic pathway because we're going to actually have to waste in NADPH. So here's our NADPH. Ordinarily, when we think of wasting in NADPH, we think of biosynthesis. That's ordinarily the reason we require NADPH. But in fact, this is one of the few catabolic pathways where we're actually going to have to consume one of them. And what this enzyme is going to do is it's going to condense lysine and alpha-ketoglutarate with the subsequent loss of water. In other words, if we were looking at this molecule, the oxygen that's part of water is the one I'm going to highlight purple. It's the ketone oxygen alpha-ketoglutarate. That oxygen ends up in this water molecule that gets lost. And so what lysine alpha-ketoglutarate reductase does is it condenses lysine and alpha-ketoglutarate into a molecule called saccharine. And oftentimes, what this pathway is called the saccharine degradation pathway. Much like in tryptophan catabolism, we have the kynurenine pathway. This one's called the saccharine pathway. And the reason it's called the saccharine pathway is because now once you form saccharine, you're committed to the catabolic pathway. This is the point of no return. Okay, so saccharine is going to be consumed by the C-terminal side of this glycosyl enzyme called saccharine dehydrogenase. And this one's not going to be an NADP-dependent enzyme. It's going to be an NAD-dependent enzyme. And specifically, what it's going to do is it's going to dehydrogenate and cleave off L-glutamate. Okay, so when we dehydrogenate, we're going to get out NADH, and we know what happens to NADH. That's going to get consumed by NADH ubiquitinone oxidoreductase, which is complex one of the mitochondria, and you get the pumping of 4 protons from the matrix into the inner membrane space, right? And that powers ATP synthase. Well, when we cleave off glutamate, that leaves this molecule called alpha-aminoadipate 6-semialdehyde. And the reason I say 6-semialdehyde is because the 6th position is what has the aldehyde. And you can probably imagine what's going to happen now. We're going to dehydrogenate it. Right? We're going to dehydrogenate it. And specifically, we're dehydrogenating the aldehyde, right? And you can imagine that if we dehydrogenate an aldehyde, it's going to end up as a carboxylate, and it will. And if you notice, in alpha-aminoadipate it is. And the enzyme that catalyzes this reaction is called alpha-aminoadipate 6-semialdehyde dehydrogenase. Now, this is a strange aldehyde dehydrogenase for several reasons. Number one, it's expressed in multiple compartments within the cell. It's expressed not only in the mitochondrion, it's also expressed in the cytosol and the nucleus. And that's bizarre because our bifunctional enzyme of lysine ketoglutarate reductase and saccharine dehydrogenase, this is purely a mitochondrial enzyme, and it's mostly expressed in the liver, but the point is that it's mitochondrial. The alpha-aminoadipate 6-semialdehyde is expressed in the mitochondrion, but it's also expressed in the cytosol and the nucleus. And to understand that, we need to be looking at an aldehyde. Let's just look at a generic aldehyde like this, okay? So if you look at the aldehyde, you notice that this carbon, I'm about to highlight in red, this carbon is fairly electrophilic. There's nothing over on this side except we could basically say a proton, right? There's just a proton right there, right? But there's nothing there shielding that particular carbon from a nucleophilic attack. So you can imagine that that particular carbon is fairly electrophilic, and that can be dangerous, especially when you get into the nucleus where the DNA is. So one of the reasons why this particular enzyme is expressed in multiple compartments is because it doesn't have absolute specificity for alpha-aminoadipate 6-semialdehyde. It can react with other aldehydes and oxidize them up to more stable carboxylates. And I hope that makes sense. Carboxylates are more stable. They're less prone to nucleophilic attack, and so they're not as reactive. So by oxidizing aldehydes up to carboxylates, you render them less reactive and lower in energy. And the product of this reaction, assuming we're doing lysine catabolism, is called alpha-aminoadipate. And you look at this molecule and you say, hey, if I was to use a transaminase, I'd get a ketone there. And that would give me alpha-ketoadipate, and that's exactly what's going to happen. Notice that we have this alpha-amine right here. This is our alpha carbon. And that alpha-amine, if we did a transaminase reaction, would be substituted with a carbonyl. Mechanistically, it's not correct to say that, but on the purpose of a test, when you're trying to think of structures, it works. So you substitute the amine with a carbonyl, and you get alpha-ketoadipate. And of course, the alpha-ketoadipate is consumed by the alpha-ketoadipate dehydrogenase complex. And certainly go watch the video on that if you need to see that. Okay. But in the process, we take that amine, transfer it onto alpha-ketoglutarate, and we get L-glutamate out of it. And of course, it's a pyridoxal phosphate-dependent reaction like all transaminases are. So let's do a very quick recap of this pathway. Okay. So we take lysine and react it with a bifunctional enzyme complex. The first reaction that takes place is lysine alpha-ketoglutarate reductase. We burn NADPH and condense lysine and alpha-ketoglutarate with the loss of water. And we get this condensed structure called saccharine. And then the C-terminal side of this bifunctional complex catalyzes the dehydrogenation and cleavage off of glutamate. And we end up getting alpha-aminoadipate 6-semialdehyde. And remember that this particular enzyme, like pretty much every committed step in amino acid oxidation, is expressed in the mitochondria. And pretty much for the most part, unless it's also expressed in the cytosol, pretty much all of these enzymes are mitochondrial. So you can pretty much assume that. Okay, but it just so happens that one of these enzymes, which was the dehydrogenase, the aldehyde dehydrogenase, is also expressed in the cytosol and the nucleus. But in general, they're all expressed in the mitochondria to some extent. And this process is taking place in the liver. And so what happens is once you generate alpha-aminoadipate 6-semialdehyde, the aldehyde dehydrogenase the aldehyde up to a carboxylate, which is characteristic of alpha amino adipate, which then gets transaminated to alpha ketoadipate, and that's this molecule right here. And remember that this gets consumed by the alpha ketoadipate dehydrogenase complex. And you can imagine that when we do that, we're ultimately going to get glutaryl-CoA. We should get glutaryl S-CoA. Now, one thing I do want to mention one more time, because it's very important to this pathway, is that notice, glutaryl-CoA, if you've seen the tryptophan catabolic pathway, glutaryl S-CoA gets degraded to acetyl-CoA, and that's all it gets converted to is just acetyl-CoA. And notice that in this pathway, we didn't generate anything that was glucogenic, right? There's nothing glucogenic in this pathway that we got. So for that reason, lysine is considered one of the two amino acids that's purely ketogenic. And the reason it's ketogenic is because the alpha ketoadipate gets degraded to acetyl-CoA. So this is one of our purely ketogenic amino acids. And the way you remember the ketogenic amino acids is they're the ones that sound similar. Leucine and lysine. Those are your two purely ketogenic amino acids. Okay? And the reason is they purely get converted to acetyl-CoA. So I hope this video gives you a little bit of intuition on lysine catabolism. Remember that it gets degraded to alpha ketoadipate, or we could say glutaryl S-CoA, and certainly go watch the video on the conversion of glutaryl S-CoA to acetyl-CoA. See you in the next video. Welcome back. In the last video, we saw the conversion of 2-amino-3-carboxybutanate 6-phenylaldehyde all the way down to alpha-ketoadipate, and we talked about how alpha-ketoadipate gets consumed by the alpha-ketoadipate dehydrogenase complex. And mechanistically, we said this enzyme complex was identical to pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, alpha-ketoglutarate dehydrogenase complex, the branched-chain alpha-ketoacid dehydrogenase complex. They're all mechanistically identical. They all have the three different subunits, the E1, the E2, the E3. And we saw that the enzyme 2, which is basically our dihydrolipoyl transacetylase, gives us this guy right here, which is glutaryl S-CoA. And now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the catabolic pathway for glutaryl S-CoA. And what we're going to see is when we do this pathway, it's a pseudo form of beta oxidation. Notice that what we have is very similar to a fatty acid that's been activated, right? We have our coenzyme A, right? And we have sort of a fatty acid, except the only problem is that it ends in a carboxylate. That's unlike what we've seen in normal beta oxidation. But what we're going to see is that the pathway is actually very similar. And the only difference between this and normal beta oxidation is the first enzyme. And the first enzyme that we have here is called glutaryl S-CoA dehydrogenase. Now, this enzyme mechanistically is going to be identical to the fatty acyl-CoA dehydrogenase that we saw in normal beta oxidation. So what it's going to do is it's going to oxidize these two carbons right here that are part of, well, this would be the alpha carbon and this would be the beta carbon. So it's going to oxidize these two carbons to form an alkene. And specifically, it's our trans alkene, right, that we would normally see in beta oxidation. And this molecule that we generate through this dehydrogenase is glutathione S-CoA. And of course, we take the electrons from glutaryl S-CoA and we transfer them onto FADH2. Okay, so before we do anything else, let's talk about the FADH2. Okay, the FADH2 is going to transfer its electrons over a series of proteins. The initial electron acceptor from FADH2 is going to be something called electron transferring flavoproteins. It's going to start out in the oxidized state, and it's going to pick up the electron from FADH2, of course, regenerating FAD and the resting state of glutaryl-CoA dehydrogenase. And so you're going to get electron transferring flavoprotein in the reduced state. Well, then the electron transferring flavoprotein is going to donate its electrons to another enzyme, which is called electron transferring flavoprotein ubiquinone oxidoreductase. And when this enzyme gets a hold of those electrons, it's going to catalyze the transfer of those electrons to oxidize coenzyme Q called ubiquinone and reduce it to ubiquinol. So our yield from this part of the reaction should be 1 reduced ubiquinol, or coenzyme Q reduced. And that reduced coenzyme Q is going to feed into complex 3 of the mitochondria respiratory chain, right? Or we could call it cytochrome C ubiquinol oxidoreductase. And this particular enzyme is going to catalyze the pumping of 4 protons into the inner membrane space, which of course powers the synthesis of ATP. And keep in mind that this process is going to be occurring in the liver cells, or we could say the mitochondria of liver cells, right? Or the hepatocytes. So this ubiquinol that's generated is literally fueling the hepatocytes that are breaking down tryptophan. And depending what context you're watching this video, it could also be lysine that we're talking about. And certainly this is for tryptophan catabolism. But remember that lysine catabolism also merges with tryptophan catabolism at the production of alpha-ketoadipate. So you could be watching this in either context. But just remember that the liver cells are doing this reaction, right? So the liver cells are benefiting from this ubiquinol production. Okay, so now we have glutathione-CoA, but this is rapidly going to decompose with the loss of carbon dioxide. And what I want to mention is that the loss of carbon dioxide is spontaneous. Okay, so meaning that it has a negative delta G. And so basically what will happen is, as soon as the glutathione S-CoA dissociates from the enzyme, it just spontaneously loses carbon dioxide, and you generate this molecule right here, which is called protonyl-CoA, crotyl-CoA. And crotyl-CoA is actually a derivative of a fatty acid that you will always see in complete beta oxidation, right? It will normally be the product of beta oxidation on a 4-carbon fatty acid, right, that's been activated. And it would appear just after you use fatty acyl-CoA dehydrogenase, right? So this is a normal fatty acid that you would see in beta oxidation when you're doing oxidation of 4-carbon fatty acids. So we've seen protyl-CoA before, especially if you have seen beta oxidation or you've seen the beta oxidation playlist. And protyl-CoA is going to get hydrated by enol-CoA hydratase, okay? And this is a simple addition reaction of an alkene or a hydration of an alkene. And And at this point, in the enoyl-CoA hydrophase, every enzyme from here, these are enzymes that are in normal beta oxidation. So the only enzyme that was different is going to be this glutarate S-CoA dehydrogenase. But everything else past this point is going to be exactly the same. So if we were doing normal beta oxidation, you would see enoyl-CoA hydrophase. But again, it's just a simple hydration of an alkene using water. And what we end up generating in general is a beta-hydroxy-acyl-CoA, but in the context of glutarate S-CoA catabolism, it's called beta-hydroxybutyryl S-CoA. Okay? And notice that, again, it is a type of beta oxidation because this is our alpha carbon and this is our beta. We are oxidizing the beta carbon, right? We first form an alkene, then we hydroxylate it, and then we oxidize the hydroxyl group into a ketone. So the very next reaction is going to be an NAD-dependent oxidation. So what we're going to do is we're going to oxidize this hydroxyl group into a ketone. And as you know, beta oxidation, you know exactly what's going to happen. So we're going to use the oxidizing power of NAD, and we should get out an NADH, right? And of course, the NADH can be used by the hepatocytes, right? It can be used to fuel NADH ubiquitinone oxidoreductase, or complex 1 of the mitochondria. And of course, that pumps 4 protons from the matrix into the inner membrane space. And that proton gradient that we generate is going to power ATP synthase. Okay. Now, in the process of oxidizing that hydroxyl group into a ketone, what we generate is this, acetoacetyl-CoA. Now, acetoacetyl-CoA is going to get thiolized using coenzyme A. So this enzyme requires coenzyme A as a coenzyme. And it's going to do a nucleophilic acyl substitution effectively on this carbon right here. And so what you're going to generate using thiolase is 2 acetyl-CoA molecules. Now, before we go any further, I want to mention this, and this is really important. Okay? We see now that the glutarate S-CoA gets degraded to 2 acetyl-CoA molecules. So these are 2 acetyl-CoAs. Now, the acetyl-CoAs that we generate in amino acid oxidation, assuming we're in the fasted state, those acetyl-CoAs will ultimately go into ketone body biosynthesis. So these will go into ketone body biosynthesis, right? Ketone body biosynthesis. And so for that reason, we call this process ketogenic, because we're producing acetyl-CoA, or you could say acetoacetyl-CoA, but ultimately those products go to ketone body biosynthesis. And we'll have a whole playlist on ketone body biosynthesis. And those ketone bodies can be released by the liver, and they can be exported to other tissues like the muscle and the brain, which can use them for fuel. So I'm going to assume that you're watching this in the context of tryptophan catabolism. So what have we seen? Well, we've seen that tryptophan gets degraded to acetyl-CoA, right? So in that sense, it's ketogenic, right? But we also saw way back here that kynureninase to cleave off alanine. And the alanine gets degraded to pyruvate through alanine transamination. The pyruvate can undergo gluconeogenesis to form glucose. So in that regard, it's also glucogenic. So I'm going to assume that you're watching this in the context of tryptophan catabolism. And we know that tryptophan catabolism is both glucogenic and ketogenic. It's glucogenic because you get pyruvate out of it, which can form glucose through gluconeogenesis. And it's ketogenic in the sense that we form acetyl-CoA, and those acetyl-CoAs can use to form ketone bodies. And we'll have a whole video on ketone body biosynthesis, and we'll see that that can be exported by the liver, and they can be used by other tissues such as the brain. So I hope this video gave you a little bit of intuition on tryptophan catabolism. In the next video, we're going to do lysine or histidine. See you soon. Welcome back to the playlist on amino acid oxidation. In this video, we're going to talk about the catabolic pathways for both phenylalanine and tyrosine. And what you should find good about this video and these pathways is that they converge with each other. So if you learn the pathway for phenylalanine, you will also learn the pathway for tyrosine as well. So that's a good thing. What I always want to keep in the back of your mind is this. We're assuming in these catabolic pathway videos, we're making the assumption that we're in the fasting state. So if we're in the fasting state, that's implying that we have low blood glucose, we have glucagon as the predominant pancreatic hormone in the blood, and so forth, right? And so the liver cells are going to be doing beta oxidation, right? That's how they're keeping their NADH and ATP levels adequate, right? And they're also going to be catabolizing proteins down to amino acids, and they're going to be taking amino acids and degrading them into either ketogenic products or glucogenic products, okay? If we have a ketogenic product, that's going to imply that whatever it is getting degraded to acetyl-CoA ultimately, right? And the acetyl-CoA can then be used ultimately to make ketone bodies, right? Or in some cases, we can degrade things straight to acetoacetate or something like that, right? And that's still ketogenic because it's a ketone body, right? But the whole goal of getting something down to a ketogenic product is we can basically make it into a ketone body that can be released into the blood and used by peripheral tissues, right? If we have a glucogenic product, that implies that we can in some way shift it into the latter part of the TCA cycle and form oxaloacetate, right? And then the oxaloacetate can move into gluconeogenesis and we can make glucose. And of course, that glucose can be released by the liver into the blood, and that's part of what maintains blood glucose levels, right? At adequate levels, okay? So I just want to have you keeping that in the back of your mind, that that's what we're assuming in these videos, okay? So when we're in the fasting state, the majority of our energy now is coming from beta oxidation and amino acid oxidation. Okay. Now, in this video, we're going to first look at the catabolic pathway, and then we're going to come back and look at some of the disorders that go along with some of these enzymes if they're deficient. Okay. So our first enzyme is going to be phenylalanine hydroxylase. And in terms of phenylalanine catabolism, this is the committed step. Tyrosine cannot be dehydrated back to phenylalanine, so this is an irreversible process. And phenylalanine hydroxylase is going to be a tetrahydrobiopterin-dependent enzyme. And over here on the right side of the screen, we note the structure of tetrahydrobiopterin. That's what's right there. And notice how it's fairly similar to tetrahydrofolate. Of course, though, it lacks the para-aminobenzoic acid ring and then also the glutamate that would be attached to it. So it's smaller than tetrahydrofolate hydrofolate, but it still keeps that terra grain character. Okay? And the mechanism of phenylalanine hydroxylase is going to be the same as all amino acid tetrahydrobiopterin-dependent hydroxylases. If we look at molecular oxygen, right, one of the atoms of oxygen will get incorporated into a hydroxyl group on phenylalanine to make tyrosine. And that hydroxyl group is right here, right? That's one of the atoms of oxygen in molecular oxygen. However, if we note over here on the right, this is the tetrahydrobiopterin cycle, the other atom of oxygen gets incorporated into the tetrahydrobiopterin as a hydroxyl group, okay? And that generates something referred to as hydroxy tetrahydrobiopterin, okay? Now, the letter that's A right here that we see is basically our hydroxylase. In this case, it's phenylalanine hydroxylase. There's also other enzymes like tryptophan hydroxylase, tyrosine hydroxylase. They're all going to follow the same type of mechanism. And what's going to happen is you're going to hydroxylate tetrahydrobiopterin to make hydroxy tetrahydrobiopterin, right? But hydroxy tetrahydrobiopterin does no good to us. So what we're going to do is we're going to regenerate the tetrahydrobiopterin. And that's ultimately done through steps B and C right here. Step B is something referred to as hydroxy tetrahydrobiopterin dehydratase. And we end up generating the water, and that water is ultimately going to come from this hydroxyl group, right? So we're dehydrating it. But in the process of dehydrating, we're going to get this molecule, which is right here, and this is called dihydrobiopterin. And the way you recognize dihydrobiopterin versus tetrahydrobiopterin is dihydrobiopterin is going to have this system of 3 double bonds right here, okay? In other words, you lose 2 hydrogen atoms in the process. So one of the characteristics of dihydrobiopterin are the 3 double bonds. But notice in tetrahydrobiopterin, there's only 2, okay? So we're going to take dihydrobiopterin and reduce it back to tetrahydrobiopterin. And this is either an NADPH or an NADH-dependent reduction. And this reaction is reversible, but if we're loading up the system of dihydrobiopterin by Le Chapelier's principle, we're going to force it back to tetrahydrobiopterin, and other enzymes can use the tetrahydrobiopterin. So the other forms that really aren't any use to us, the only thing we care about is tetrahydrobiopterin, and dihydrobiopterin reductase regenerates the tetrahydrobiopterin. Okay, so now, at this point, if I can find my mouse, we've regenerated tyrosine. And I want to point your attention to that this is a picture from Leninger's 6th edition of biochemistry, and as we know from this reaction, it's not entirely correct. And what they're assuming in this reaction is they're assuming that you know the cycle right here. They're assuming that you know the tetrahydrobiopterin cycle. So we put in oxygen and we get out of water. But the water is not generated through phenylalanine hydroxylase. It's actually generated through hydroxy tetrahydrobiopterin dehydratase, right? Okay. So I just wanted to make that perfectly clear. This is not absolutely correct, but what they're doing is they're taking into account multiple enzymes. Okay. So now we have tyrosine. And tyrosine is going to react with an aminotransferase or a transaminase. And we know on tyrosine we have the alpha amine right here, right? We have the alpha amine. And we know that if we put it in contact with a transaminase and we have alpha-ketoglutarate present, we'll have a net substitution between the amine and the carbonyl, right? And so we should expect to get out glutamate, assuming we put in alpha-ketoglutarate. And what we're going to get out in the process is para-hydroxyphenylpyruvate. Now, the pyruvyl group, which I'll do in green, the pyruvyl group is this. And if you would actually take off that para-hydroxyphenyl group, you would actually, and replace it with a hydrogen, you actually have pyruvate. So that's why it's a pyruvyl group. And so the reason it's para-hydroxy is because across that benzene ring, the hydroxyl group is para to the pyruvyl group. So it's para-hydroxyphenylpyruvate. Okay. Now, one thing you need to be aware of is when we're dealing with these aromatic rings, they're especially stable. We're going to find this also when we do tryptophan catabolism. We call the tryptophan has an indole ring, which is actually even more stable than the benzene ring. Okay? And because the aromatic ring is so stable, we're really going to have to work it up in energy in order to get it to open up. So what we're going to have to do is react it with dioxygenases. And one of the things we have to understand about oxygen, molecular oxygen, is that it's an incredibly reactive species. In fact, if you go through biochemistry 1 and 2, believe it or not, it's actually one of the most reactive species that we'll come across. And so it's high energy. So what we can do is we can use that high energy and that instability and that reactiveness to react other molecules that are fairly stable. And ultimately what we're going to do in the next couple steps is we're going to use 2 dioxygenases, and the added energy we get from the molecular oxygen is going to open up the ring. Okay? And I want to make that perfectly clear. You're really going to have to whip this benzene ring up in energy in order to keep it apart, and that's ultimately what we're going to do. Okay? Now, take back to your organic chemistry 1 and 2. Okay? Let me ask you a question. Did you ever see any reactions in those classes where you completely destroyed aromaticity? And the answer is no, you never completely destroyed aromaticity. You may have gotten benzene to react, right? You generated a sigma complex or a Eisenheimer complex or whatnot, but you always regenerated aromaticity. Well, in biochemistry, we can actually use the high energy power of molecular oxygen to actually cleave apart the ring. You never saw a reaction like that in organic 1 or 2. But this is different. We're going to use molecular oxygen to open up the benzene ring. And the first step, which is a committed step, is catalyzed by para-hydroxyphenylpyruvate dioxygenase. And effectively what's going to happen in this is we're going to lose carbon dioxide. And I want to point your attention to the carbon dioxide that's used to leave is this carboxyl group right here. That's the carbon dioxide that we see right here leaving after we perform the dioxygenation. Okay. Another interesting thing about this reaction is we actually get a net carbon migration. So this whole group, and I'll eliminate the carbon dioxide for now. Actually, let me just put it all in there. This group is ultimately going to migrate onto this carbon right here. So in para-hydroxyphenylpyruvate dioxygenase, we get a net carbon migration. And of course, it's dioxygenase. So both atoms of molecular oxygen are going to get incorporated into the molecule. Okay, and that's going to give us something called homogentisate. And homogentisate is an interesting molecule. We'll do a little bit of an aside here from this pathway. And it's worth mentioning that homogentisate in other organisms has a life of its own. In other organisms, they can use homogentisate in order to biosynthesize plastiquinol, which is basically a coenzyme that's used in a photosynthetic animal's electron transport chain in the chloroplast. movement zone outside of this pathway in other organisms. So other organisms can metabolize phenylalanine and tyrosine down to this point, and then they can siphon off homogentosate into other biosynthetic pathways. So I just call that wave listening. Okay. Then homogentosate is going to get its aromatic ring completely cleaved apart, and this is catalyzed by homogentosate 1,2-dioxygenase. Okay. Again, it's a dioxygenase, so we should expect both atoms of oxygen to get incorporated into the molecule. And what we generate is something called mallyl-acetoacetate. Now, one thing I want to show you is that I'm going to draw the structure of malleate. So this is going to be malleate. Okay. Here is malleate. Oops. Here is the structure of malleate. Now notice